Irish language.
Irish is a Gaelic language of the Indo-European languages family, originating in Ireland and historically spoken by the Irish people. Irish is spoken as a first language by a small minority of Irish people, and as a second language by a rather larger group. Irish enjoys constitutional status as the national and first official language of the Republic of Ireland. It is an official language of the European Union and an officially recognised minority language in Northern Ireland. Irish was the predominant language of the Irish people for most of their recorded history, and they brought it with them to other countries, notably Scotland and the Isle of Man, where it gave rise to Scottish Gaelic and Manx. It has the oldest vernacular literature in Western Europe. The fate of the language was influenced by the increasing power of the English state in Ireland. Elizabethan officials viewed the use of Irish unfavourably, as being a threat to all things English in Ireland. Its decline began under English rule in the 17th century. In the latter part of the 19th century there was a dramatic decrease in the number of speakers, beginning after the Great Famine of 1845 to 1852, when Ireland lost 20 to 25% of its population either to emigration or death. Irish-speaking areas were hit especially hard. By the end of British rule, the language was spoken by less than 15% of the national population. Since then, Irish speakers have been in the minority except in areas collectively known as the Gaeltacht Act. Efforts have been made by the state, individuals and organisations to preserve, promote and revive the language, but with mixed results. Around the turn of the 21st century, estimates of native speakers ranged from 20,000 to 80,000 people. In the 2006 census for the Republic, 85,000 people reported using Irish as a daily language outside of the education system, and 1.2 million reported using it at least occasionally in or out of school. In the 2011 census, these numbers had increased to 94,000 and 1.3 million, respectively. There are several thousand Irish speakers in Northern Ireland. It has been estimated that the active Irish language scene probably comprises 5 to 10% of Ireland's population. In recent decades there has been a significant increase in the number of urban Irish speakers, particularly in Dublin. This community, described as disparate but large, well-educated and mostly middle-class, enjoys a lively cultural life, and has been linked to the growth of non-mainstream schools which teach through the medium of Irish. There are also many Irish speakers abroad, particularly in the United States and Canada. Irish was spoken until the early 20th century on the island of Newfoundland, in a form known as Newfoundland Irish.
Names.
In An Gaeilge Díonú Ofigiúil, the official written standard, the name of the language is Gaeilge, Irish pronunciation. Before the spelling reform of 1948, this form was spelled Gaeilge. Originally this was the genitive of Gaedhilg, the form used in classical modern Irish. Older spellings of this include Gaedhilg in Classical Irish and Gaedhilg in Old Irish. The modern spelling results from the deletion of the silent dh in the middle of Gaedhilg, whereas the name Gaelic language, used to refer to the language family including Irish, comes from Old Irish. Other forms of the name found in the various modern Irish dialects, in addition to South Connacht Gaeilge above, include Gaedhilic Gaelic Gaelig or Gaedlag in Ulster Irish and Northern Connacht Irish and Gaedhilian Gaeluin Gaelane in Munster Irish. In Europe the language is usually referred to as Irish, with Gaelic or Irish Gaelic often used elsewhere. The term Irish Gaelic is often used when English speakers discuss the relationship between the three Gaelic languages, Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx. Sometimes Irish is taken to mean Hiberno-English, a form of English associated with Ireland. Scottish Gaelic is usually referred to simply as Gaelic, though pronounced differently. Listen, help info.
History.
Written Irish is first attested in Ogham inscriptions from the 4th century AD. This stage of the language is known as Primitive Irish. These writings have been found throughout Ireland and the west coast of Great Britain. Primitive Irish transitioned into Old Irish through the 5th century. Old Irish, dating from the 6th century, used the Latin alphabet and is attested primarily in marginalia to Latin manuscripts. During this time, the Irish language absorbed many Latin words, including ecclesiastical terms. Examples are eespag, bishop, from episcopus, and domnich, Sunday, from dominica. By the 10th century, Old Irish had evolved into Middle Irish, which was spoken throughout Ireland and in Scotland and the Isle of Man. It is the language of a large corpus of literature, including the Ulster cycle. From the 12th century Middle Irish began to evolve into Modern Irish in Ireland, into Scottish Gaelic in Scotland, and into the Manx language in the Isle of Man. Early Modern Irish, dating from the 13th century, was the basis of the literary language of both Ireland and Gaelic-speaking Scotland. Modern Irish, as attested in the work of such writers as Geoffrey Keating, may be said to date from the 17th century, and was the medium of popular literature from that time on. From the 18th century on, the language lost ground in the east of the country, partly because the British government discouraged its use in education, law and administration, partly because of the spread of bilingualism, a conspicuous example of the process known by linguists as language shift. It was a change characterized by diglossia, two languages being used by the same community in different social and economic situations, and transitional bilingualism, monoglot Irish-speaking grandparents with bilingual children and monoglot English-speaking grandchildren. By the mid-18th century, English had moved from being the language of government to being the language of the Catholic middle class, the Catholic Church and public intellectuals. English had a particular economic value for emigrants, especially females. Increasingly, as the value of English became apparent, the prohibition on Irish in schools had the sanction of parents. The Great Famine, 1845–1849, is seen as precipitating the final catastrophic decline. The same public intellectuals who had acquiesced in the change to English now furnished some of the first individuals to challenge it. At the end of the 19th century they instituted the Gaelic revival in an attempt to encourage the learning and use of Irish, though few adult learners mastered the language. The vehicle of the revival was the Gaelic League, and particular emphasis was placed on the folk tradition, which in Irish is particularly rich. Efforts were also made to develop journalism and a modern literature.
Phonology.
In pronunciation, Irish most closely resembles its nearest relatives, Scottish Gaelic and Manx. One notable feature is that consonants, except /h/ come in pairs, one broad, velarized, pronounced with the back of the tongue pulled back towards the soft palate, and one slender, palatalized, pronounced with the middle of the tongue pushed up towards the hard palate. While broad slender pairs are not unique to Irish, being found, for example, in Russian, in Irish they have a grammatical function and can pose a problem for English speakers. Diphthongs, I you at I, at you.
Syntax and morphology.
The grammar of Irish shares with other Celtic languages a number of features which, while not unique, are unusual in an Indo-European context. The grammatical features most unfamiliar to English speakers of the language are the initial consonant mutations, the verb-subject-object word order, and the use of two different forms for to be. None of these features are peculiar to Irish. They occur in other Celtic languages and sometimes in non-Celtic languages. Morphosyntactically triggered initial consonant mutations are found in Fula and Shoshone. VSO word order is found in Classical Arabic and Biblical Hebrew. And Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan and Galician have two different forms for to be. The use of prepositional pronouns recalls the Semitic languages, as well as some lesser-known European languages such as Venetian. The situation is complicated by dialect variations, by a recommended standard and by what appears to be a colloquial simplification of both grammar and pronunciation by fluent urban speakers.
Syntax.
Irish is a VSO, verb-subject-object, language, and uses two verbs of to be. One of these, the copula, known in Irish as an chopail, is used to describe the permanent identity or characteristic of a person or thing as opposed to temporary aspects. The adjective normally follows the noun, the possessive adjectives are an exception, but there are a certain number of adjectives and particles which may function as prefixes.
Morphology.
Irish is an inflected language, having, in its standard form, the following cases: common, the old nominative and accusative, vocative and genitive. In Munster dialects a dative form persisted, though this has been largely discarded by younger speakers. The present inflectional system represents a radical simplification of the grammar of Old Irish. Irish nouns may be masculine or feminine, the neuter having disappeared. To a certain degree the gender difference is indicated by specific word endings, an and in being masculine and og feminine. Another feature of Irish grammar that is shared with other Celtic languages is the use of prepositional pronouns, fo reinnicha reamh hogacha, which are essentially conjugated prepositions. For example, the word for it is ag, which in the first person singular becomes agam at me. When used with the verb be, to be ag indicates possession. This is the equivalent of the English verb to have. Tala por agam. I have a book. Literally, there is a book at me, tala por agat. You have a book, tala por age. He has a book, tala por azi. She has a book, tala por again. We have a book, tala por agab. You, plural, have a book, tala por ac. They have a book.
Mutations.
Irish shares with other Celtic languages a feature known as mutation, whereby initial and final consonants may change to express nuances of grammatical relationship and meaning. Mutation affects verbs, nouns and adjectives. Certain consonants may be capable of changing in two ways, depending on the context. In Irish, there are two classes of initial consonant mutations. Lenition, in Irish, simu-softening describes the change of stops into fricatives. Indicated in old orthography by a bailt, a dot, written above the changed consonant, as in the dot shown above the C in Gaelic below, this is now shown in writing by adding an H. Keth. Throw. Chith me I threw. This is an example of the lenition as a past tense marker, which is caused by the use of do, although it is now usually omitted. Margot market, marketplace, bargain tadhg in Hargate the man of the street, word for word tadhg of the marketplace. Here we see the lenition marking the genitive case of a masculine noun, Sean Sean, John a Shen. O John. Here we see lenition as part of what is called the vocative case. In fact, the vocative lenition is triggered by the a or vocative marker before Shen, Keth. Throw. Chith me I threw. This is an example of the lenition as a past tense marker, which is caused by the use of do, although it is now usually omitted. Margot market, marketplace, bargain tadhg in Hargate the man of the street, word for word tadhg of the marketplace. Here we see the lenition marking the genitive case of a masculine noun, Sean Sean, John a Shen. O John. Here we see lenition as part of what is called the vocative case. In fact, the vocative lenition is triggered by the a or vocative marker before Shen, eclipsis. In Irish, you're up covers the voicing of voiceless stops, as well as the nasalization of voiced stops. A their father rn a their our father, to start, rdtus at the start, Gailime Galway in Gailime in Galway, a their father rn a their our father, to start, rdtus at the start, Gailime Galway in Gailime in Galway. Mutations are often the only way to distinguish similar grammatical forms. For example, the only way, apart from context, in which the possessive pronouns her, his, and their can be distinguished is through initial mutations, since all these meanings are represented by the same word a. It is seen here in apposition to the word brog, shoe. Their shoe, ambrog, eclipsis, his shoe, a bhrog, lenition, her shoe, a brog, unchanged.
Orthography.
Modern Irish typically uses the ISO basic Latin alphabet without the letters J, K, Q, W, X, Y and Z, but with the addition of one diacritic sign, the acute accent, A-E-I-O-U, known in Irish as the Syniad Fada long mark, plural Sint Fada. the letter V has been naturalized into the language, although it is not part of the traditional alphabet, and has the same pronunciation as BH. In idiomatic English usage, this diacritic is frequently referred to simply as the fader, where the adjective is used as a noun. The fader serves to lengthen the sound of the vowels and in some cases also changes their quality. For example, in Munster Irish, Kerry, A is /// or /// and A is /A, / in father, but in Ulster Irish, Donegal, it tends to be /E, /. Traditional orthography had an additional diacritic, a dot over some consonant to indicate lenition. In modern Irish, the letter H suffixed to a consonant indicates that the consonant is lenited. Thus, for example, Gaelach has become Gaeilge. Around the time of World War II, Seamus Dalton, in charge of Rannog and Aistria Shane, the official translations department of the Irish government, issued his own guidelines about how to standardise Irish spelling and grammar. This de facto standard was subsequently approved by the state and called the Official Standard or Coic nu Official. It simplified and standardised the orthography. Many words had silent letters removed and vowel combination brought closer to the spoken language. Where multiple versions existed in different dialects for the same word, one or more were selected. Examples: Gored Heelg / Gored Hilg, E / Gored Heeling / Gaelic / Gaelane / Gored Heelg / Jalane, Gaeilge, Irish language, Lupade, Lu, Louth, Bayard, beer, food. The standard spelling does not necessarily reflect the pronunciation used in particular dialects. For example, in Standard Irish, beer, food, has the genitive beer. In Munster Irish, however, the genitive is pronounced /g, j/. For this reason, the spelling Bayard is still used by speakers of some dialects, in particular those that show a meaningful and audible difference between Bayard, nominative case, and bid, genitive case, of food, foods. In Munster the latter spelling regularly produces the pronunciation /g, j/ because final id, I regularly delenites to ig in Munster pronunciation. Another example would be the word crua, meaning hard. This pronounced /crut j/ in Munster, in line with the pre-Coigdean spelling, cruaid. In Munster, o is pronounced /e, and oi pronounced /I, but the new spellings of saogal, life, world, genitive, sorgale, have become sale, genitive saul. This produces irregularities in the match-up between the spelling and pronunciation in Munster, because the word is pronounced /sge, lg/, genitive /sge, lj/. The dot above diacritic, called a punximhid or c blailt, often shortened to blailt, derives from the punctum delens used in medieval manuscripts to indicate deletion, similar to crossing out unwanted words in handwriting today. From this usage it was used to indicate the lenition of s, from /s/ to /h/ and f, from /f/ to 0, in Old Irish texts. Lenition of c, p, and t was indicated by placing the letter h after the affected consonant. Lenition of other sounds was left unmarked. Later both methods were extended to be indicators of lenition of any sound except L and N, and two competing systems were used. Lenition could be marked by a blailt or by a postposed h. Eventually, use of the blailt predominated when texts were written using Gaelic letters, while the h predominated when writing using Roman letters. Today, Gaelic type and the blailt are rarely used except where a traditional style is required, for example the motto on the University College Dublin coat of arms or the symbol of the Irish Defence Forces, the Irish Defence Forces cap badge, Iglaig now H Arian. Letters with a blailt are available in Unicode and Latin 8-character sets, see Latin extended additional chart.
Dialects.
Irish is represented by several traditional dialects and by various varieties of urban Irish, the latter influenced in grammar and phonology by both traditional Irish and by English. Differences between the dialects make themselves felt in stress, intonation, vocabulary and structural features. Roughly speaking, the three major dialect areas which survive coincide with the provinces of Munster, Quaid Mumman, Connacht, Quaid Nacht, and Ulster, Quaid Ulad. Records of some dialects of Leinster were made by the Irish Folklore Commission and others prior to their extinction. Newfoundland, in eastern Canada, had a form of Irish derived from the Munster Irish of the later 18th century, see Newfoundland Irish.
Leinster.
Down to the early 19th century, and often later, Irish was spoken in all the counties of Leinster, Carlow, Dublin, Kildare, Kilkenny, Leo, Longford, Louth, Meath, Westmeath, Offaly, Wexford and Wicklow. The evidence furnished by Pleasanames, literary sources and recorded speech indicates that there were 3 dialects spoken in Leinster, 1 main dialect and 2 of lesser significance. The minor dialects were represented by the Ulster speech of counties Meath and Louth, which extended as far south as the Boyne Valley, and a Munster dialect found in Kilkenny and South Leo. The main dialect was represented by a broad central belt stretching from West Connacht eastwards to the Liffey estuary and southwards to Wexford, though with many local variations. As the main dialect was of the Connacht type, it typically placed the stress on the first syllable of a word. Another Connacht characteristic, found in Pleasanames, was a preference for the pronunciation cia where the standard spelling is cn. The word cnoc, hill, would therefore be pronounced croc. Examples are the Pleasanames Cruxilling, cnoc slin, in County Dublin and Cruceen, Gnoisin, in Carlow. There was a tendency in East Leinster to diphthongize or impose a long vowel on words like pole, hole, sill, monastery, coil, wood, shean, head, cam, crooked, and dream, crowd. A curious feature of the dialect was the pronunciation of the vowel o, which generally became e in East Leinster and I in the West. Early evidence regarding colloquial Irish in East Leinster is found in the First Book of the Introduction of Knowledge, 1547, by the English physician and traveller Andrew Boord. The illustrative phrases he uses include the following, with regularised Irish spelling in brackets.
The Pale.
The Pale, and Fale, was an area around late medieval Dublin under the control of the English government. By the late 15th century it consisted of an area along the coast from Dalkey, south of Dublin, to the garrison town of Dundalk, with an inland boundary encompassing Naas and Leixlip in the earldom of Kildare, and Trim and Kells in County Meath to the north. Into this area of English tongue the Irish language steadily advanced. An English official remarked of the Pale in 1515 that all the common people of the says half counties that obeyeth the king's laws, for the most part be of Irish birth, of Irish habit, and of Irish language. With the strengthening of English cultural and political control, language reversal began to occur, but this did not become clearly evident until the 18th century. Even then, in the decennial period 1771 to 1781, the percentage of Irish speakers in Meath was at least 41%. By 1851 this had fallen to less than 3%.
General decline.
English expanded strongly in Leinster in the 18th century, but Irish speakers were still numerous. In the decennial period 1771 to 1781 certain counties had estimated percentages of Irish speakers as follows, though the estimates are likely to be too low. The language saw its most rapid initial decline in Leo, Wexford, Wicklow, County Dublin and perhaps Kildare. The proportion of Irish-speaking children in Leinster went down as follows, 17% in the 1700s, 11% in the 1800s, 3% in the 1830s and none in the 1860s. The Irish census of 1851 showed that there was still a number of older speakers in County Dublin. Sound recordings were made between 1928 and 1931 of some of the last speakers in Meath, County Louth, now available in digital form. The last known traditional native speaker in Meath, and in Leinster as a whole, was Annie O'Hanlon, née Dobbin, who died in 1960.
Munster.
Munster Irish is mainly spoken in the Gaeltacht areas of Kerry, County Ciarai, Ring, and Rin, near Dungarvan, Dungarvan, in Waterford, County Fortledge, and Muskerry, Muskry, and Cape Clear Island, Olean Chlyra, in the western part of Cork, Kintyre Chalkeye. The most important subdivision in Munster is that between Des is Irish, nowadays, spoken in Waterford, and the rest of Munster Irish. Some typical features of Munster Irish are the use of endings to show person on verbs in parallel with a pronominal subject system, thus I must as in Munster Caith feed as well as Caith fid me, while other dialects prefer Caith fid me means I. I was and you were is by os agus bees as well as by me agus by to in Munster, but more commonly by me agus by to in other dialects. Note that these are strong tendencies, and the personal forms bios etc. are used in the west and north, particularly when the words are last in the clause. Use of independent dependent forms of verbs that are not included in the standard. For example, I see in Munster as chim, which is the independent form. Northern Irish also uses a similar form, tkim, whereas I do not see as neve hasim, basim being the dependent form, which is used after particles such as ni not. Chim is replaced by fasim in the standard. Similarly, the traditional form preserved in Munster bearim I give neithugem as tugem neithugem in the standard. Giabhim I get neebfam as fame neebfam, when before nn, m, ra, rd, ll and so on, in monosyllabic words and in the stressed syllable of multisyllabic words where the syllable is followed by a consonant, some short vowels are lengthened while others are diphthongized, thus shean head, cam crooked, gear short, ord sledgehammer, call foreigner, non-Gael, iont is a wonder, a marvel, companic companion, mate, etc. A copular construction involving a it is frequently used. Thus I am an Irish person can be said as Éireann nach me and Éireann nach is a me in Munster. There is a subtle difference in meaning, however, the first choice being a simple statement of fact, while the second brings emphasis onto the word Éireann nach. In effect the construction is a type of fronting. Both masculine and feminine words are subject to lenition after inson, zarsan, in the den of the, and donta for the zar siopa, in the shop, compared to the standard zar siopa. The standard lenites only feminine nouns in the dative in these cases, eclipsis of f after zar, zabfime, in the farm, instead of san fheirm, eclipsis of t and d after preposition plus singular article, with all prepositions except after inson, den and don, rndtigh on the house, ag and doras at the door. Stress falls in general found on the second syllable of a word when the first syllable contains a short vowel, and the second syllable contains a long vowel, diphthong, or is, ach, for example by Oran, pin, as opposed to by Oran in Connacht and Ulster.
Connacht.
The strongest dialect of Connacht Irish is to be found in Connemara and the Aran Islands. Much closer to the larger Connacht Gaeltacht is the dialect spoken in the smaller region on the border between Galway, Gaelime, and Mayo. The northern Mayo dialect of Eris, Ioras, and Achill, is in grammar and morphology essentially a Connacht dialect, but shows some similarities to Ulster Irish due to large-scale immigration of dispossessed people following the plantation of Ulster, though it is this form of Irish which is closest to the true original Connacht dialect which would have been spoken in counties Sligo, Roscommon, Leitrim and East Galway. Features in Connacht Irish differing from the official standard include a preference for verbal nouns ending in a chan, for example lagacan instead of lagu, weakening. The non-standard pronunciation of the Quaff Harage area with lengthened vowels and heavily reduced endings gives it a distinct sound. In distinguishing features of Connacht and Ulster dialect include the pronunciation of word final broad bh and mh as, rather than as in Munster. For example Sliab, mountain is pronounced in Connacht and Ulster as opposed to in the south. In addition Connacht and Ulster speakers tend to include the we pronoun rather than use the standard compound form used in Munster, for example by mud is used for we were instead of pioma. As in Munster Irish, some short vowels are lengthened and others diphthongized before nn, m, ra, rd, ll, in monosyllabic words and in the stressed syllable of multisyllabic words where the syllable is followed by a consonant. This can be seen in shean head, cam crooked, gear short, ord sledgehammer, call foreigner, non-Gael, iont is a wonder, a marvel, etc. The form aib, when occurring at the end of words like agib, tends to be pronounced as an y sound. There are a number of differences between the popular South Connemara form of Irish, the Mid-Connacht Joyce Country form, on the border between Mayo and Galway, and the Achill and Erris forms in the north of the province. In South Connemara, for example, there is a tendency to substitute a b sound at the end of words ending in bh, such as sib, lib and duib, something not found in the rest of Connacht. These words would be pronounced respectively as shiv, live, and doffer in the other areas. This placing of the b sound is also present at the end of words ending in vowels, such as ak, pronounced as akhab, and leo, pronounced as leohab. There is also a tendency to omit the g sound in words such as agam, agat and again, a characteristic also of other Connacht dialects. All these pronunciations are distinctively regional. The pronunciation prevalent in the Joyce country, the area around Loch Corrib and Loch Mask, is quite similar to that of South Connemara, with a similar approach to the words agam, agat and again, and a similar approach to pronunciation of vowels and consonants. But there are noticeable differences in vocabulary, with certain words such as doilia, difficult, and fossil being preferred to the more usual diacare and ascaralt. There is also a tendency to pronounce the consonant th as an f in certain words such as wathu and sruthan. Similarly, the word leo tends to be pronounced as leifar. Another interesting aspect of this sub-dialect is that almost all vowels at the end of words tend to be pronounced as I, ale, other, kosa, feet, and dianta, dun, tend to be pronounced as ali, kosai and dantai respectively. The Irish of Achill and Erris tends to differ from that of South Connacht in many aspects of vocabulary and, in some instances, of pronunciation. It is often stated that the Irish of these regions has much in common with Ulster Irish, with words ending mh and bh having a much softer son, with a tendency to terminate words such as leo and duib with f, giving leifar and doffer respectively. In addition to a vocabulary typical of other area of Connacht, one also finds words like amhark, meaning to look, and pronounced onk, nimnich, painful or sore, druid, close, mate, here, doilia, difficult, new, and tigla, to be able to, that is a form similar to flydear. Irish President Douglas Hyde was possibly the last speaker of the Roscommon dialect of Irish.
Ulster.
Linguistically, the most important of the Ulster dialects today is that of the Rosses, now Rossa, which has been used extensively in literature by such authors as the brothers Seamus O'Grianna and Seos Macgrianna, locally known as Shmi Phalamai and Joe Phalamai. This dialect is essentially the same as that in Gweedore, Gorthdop hair equals inlet of streaming water, and used by native singers Enya, Riithan, and Mare Brennan and their siblings in Clanad. Clan as Dapor equals family from the Dapor, Na Cassadai, and married Neemhane from another local band Alton. Ulster Irish sounds very different and shares several features with southern dialects of Scottish Gaelic and Manx Gaelic, as well as having lots of characteristic words and shades of meanings. However, since the demise of those Irish dialects spoken natively in what is today Northern Ireland, it is probably an exaggeration to see present-day Ulster Irish as an intermediary form between Scottish Gaelic and the southern and western dialects of Irish. Northern Scottish Gaelic has many non-Ulster features in common with Munster Irish. One noticeable trait of Ulster Irish, Manx Gaelic and Scots Gaelic is the use of the negative particle car, n, in place of the Munster and Connacht ni. Though Southern Ulster Irish tends to use ni more than car, n, has almost ousted ni in northernmost dialects, for example Rosegill and Tory Island, though even in these areas nil is not as more common than chan fhuil or car bhfuil. Another noticeable trait is the pronunciation of the first-person singular verb ending im as am, also common to Ulster, Man and Scotland, Munster Connacht Leonster Sayule my walk, Ulster Sayulam.
Urban aspect.
Irish was spoken as a community language in Irish towns and cities, even to some extent in Dublin, as late as the 19th century. In Dublin some of these speakers were incomers, but many were permanent residents. The Pale itself, often referred to as English-speaking, had many Irish speakers. The Irish of Dublin, situated as it was between the East Ulster dialect of Meath and Louth to the north and the Leinster-Connacht dialect further south, is likely to have reflected the characteristics of both in phonology and grammar. In County Dublin itself, the general rule was to place the stress on the initial vowel of words. With time it appears that the forms of the dative case took over the other case endings, a tendency found to a lesser extent in other dialects. In a letter written in Dublin in 1691 we find such examples as the following: Gnothwim, accusative, standard form note, Tiothuib, accusative, standard form Tiother, Lochlan Uib, genitive, standard form Lochlane, Lythioleb, genitive, standard form Lythiolta. It is not known how long these features persisted. The English authorities responded to the use of Irish in Dublin by emphasising the need to preach to Irish-speaking congregations in their own language. This was illustrated by the appointment in March 1656 of a converted Catholic priest, Seamus Corsey, to preach in Irish at Bride's Parish every Sunday. The year before, several local dignitaries were ordered to oversee a lecture in Irish to be given in Dublin. Irish was sufficiently strong in early 18th century Dublin to be the language of a coterie of poets and scribes led by Sean and Tadhg Seachtain, both poets of note. Scribal activity in Irish persisted in Dublin right through the 18th century. An outstanding example was Maurice O'Gorman, Maurice Gorman, a prolific producer of manuscripts who advertised his services, in English, in Faulkner's Dublin Journal. In other urban centres, the descendants of medieval Anglo-Norman settlers, the so-called Old English, were Irish-speaking or bilingual by the 16th century. The English administrator and traveller Fynes Morrison, writing in the last years of the 16th century, said that the English-Irish and the very citizens, excepting those of Dublin where the Lord Deputy resides, though they could speak English as well as we, yet commonly speak Irish among themselves, and were hardly induced by our familiar conversation to speak English with us. The demise of native cultural institutions in the 17th century saw the social prestige of Irish diminish, and the gradual Anglicisation of the middle classes followed. The census of 1851 showed that the towns and cities of Munster still had significant Irish-speaking populations. In 1819 James McCudge, a veteran Methodist lay preacher in Irish, wrote, "In some of the largest southern towns, Cork, Kinsale, and even the Protestant town of Bandon, provisions are sold in the markets, and cried in the streets, in Irish." Irish speakers constituted over 40% of the population of Cork even in 1851. The 19th century saw a reduction in the number of Dublin's Irish speakers, in keeping with the trend elsewhere. This continued until the end of the century, when the Gaelic revival saw the creation of a strong Irish-speaking network, typically united by various branches of the Gaelic League, and accompanied by renewed literary activity. By the 1930s Dublin had a lively literary life in Irish. The last few decades have seen the rapid expansion of an independent urban school system, known generally as Gaelscoileanna. These schools teach, or aim to teach, entirely through Irish. There are over 30 such schools in Dublin alone. It is likely that the number of urban native speakers, that is people who were born into Irish-speaking households and educated through Irish, is on the increase. It has been suggested that Ireland's towns and cities are acquiring a critical mass of Irish speakers, reflected in the expansion of Irish language media. Colloquial urban Irish is changing in unforeseen ways, with attention being drawn to the rapid loss of consonantal mutations, which are intrinsic to the language. It is presently uncertain whether the urban Irish of non-native speakers will become a dialect in its own right or grow further apart from native Gaeltacht Irish and become a Creole, that is a new language.
Encadian Oifidual.
Encadian Oifidual, the official standard, often shortened to Encadian, is the standard language, which is taught in most schools in Ireland, though with strong influences from local dialects. It was published by the translators in Dáil in the 1950s. Its development in the 1950s and 1960s had two purposes. One was to simplify Irish spelling, which had retained its classical spelling, by removing many silent letters, and to give a standard written form that was mutually intelligible by speakers with different dialects. Though many aspects of the Gaeilge are essentially those of Connacht Irish, this was simply because this is the central dialect which forms a bridge, as it were, between the north and south. In reality, dialect speakers pronounce words as in their own dialect, as the spelling simply reflects the pronunciation of Classical Irish. For example, Seachtain Na Gaeilge in early modern Irish was pronounced. The spelling has been retained, but the word is variously pronounced in the south, in Connacht, and in the north. Big Small was in early modern Irish, and is now in Waterford Irish, in Cork Kerry Irish, varies between and in the west, and is in the north. The simplification was weighted in favour of the western dialect. For example, the early modern Irish liber, dative case leobed bed is pronounced as well as in Waterford Irish, in Cork Kerry Irish, in Connacht Irish, in Quaff Irish, and in the north. Native speakers from the north and south may consider that leobed should be the representation in the Gaeilge rather than actual liber. However, liber is the historically correct nominative form and arguably preferable to the historically incorrect yet common use of the dative form for the nominative. On the other hand, in some cases the Gaeilge retained classical spellings even when none of the dialects had retained the corresponding pronunciation. For example, it has retained the classical Irish spelling of on, for, etc., and agat, by, of, etc. The first is pronounced throughout the Gaeilge-speaking world, and is written in Manx, and in Scottish Gaelic, and should be written either or in Irish. The second is pronounced in the south, and in the north and west. Again, Manx and Scottish Gaelic reflect this pronunciation much more clearly than Irish does, Manx eg, Scottish egg. In many cases, however, the Gaeilge can only refer to the classical language, in that every dialect is different, as happens in the personal forms of agat, by, of, etc. Munster, Egan, Egat, Ige, Ici, Aguing/Aguing, West Cork Kerry Agwan/Agwan, Agwib/Ac, Connacht, Ugam, Ad, Agad, Age, Ac, Ain, Again, Aggie, Acab, Ulster, Achim, Ached, Age, Ac, Agin, Aghith, Ac, Gaeilge, Ugam, Agat, Age, Ac, Again, Agib, Ac/. Another purpose was to create a grammatically regularized or simplified standard which would make the language more accessible for the majority English-speaking school population. In part this is why the Gaeilge is not universally respected by native speakers, in that it makes simplified language an ideal, rather than the ideal that native speakers traditionally had of their dialects, or of the classical dialect if they had knowledge of that. Of course, this was not the original aim of the developers, who rather saw the school version Gaeilge as a means of easing second language learners into the task of learning full Irish. The Gaeilge verb system is a prime example, with the reduction in irregular verb forms and personal forms of the verb, except for the first persons. However, once the word standard becomes used, the forms represented as standard take on a power of their own, and therefore the ultimate goal has become forgotten in many circles. The Gaeilge, in general, is used by non-native speakers, frequently from the capital, and is sometimes also called Dublin Irish, or Urban Irish. As it is taught in many Irish language schools, where Irish is the main, or sometimes only, medium of instruction, it is also sometimes called Gaelscoil Irish. The so-called Belfast Irish, spoken in that city's Gaeltacht quarter, is the Gaeilge, heavily influenced by Ulster Irish and Belfast English. The differences between dialects are considerable, and have led to recurrent difficulties in defining Standard Irish. In recent decades, contacts between speakers of different dialects have become more frequent and the differences between the dialects are less noticeable.
And Cadian Oifidual, Cadian Athbrithnov.
As of August 2012, the first major revision of the Gaeilge Oifidual is available, both online and in print. Among the changes to be found in the revised version are, for example, various attempts to bring the recommendations of the Gaeilge closer to the spoken dialect of Gaeltacht speakers, including allowing further use of the nominative case where the genitive would historically have been found.
Current status: Republic of Ireland.
Irish is given recognition by the Constitution of Ireland as the national and first official language of the Republic of Ireland, with English being another official language. Although this is technically the case, in practice almost all government debates and business are conducted in English. In 1938, the founder of Seachtain Na Gaeilge, the Gaelic League, Douglas Hyde, was inaugurated as the first president of Ireland. The record of his delivering his inaugural declaration of office in Roscommon Irish remains almost the only surviving remnant of anyone speaking in that dialect. From the foundation of the Irish Free State in 1922, see also History of the Republic of Ireland, the Irish government required a degree of proficiency in Irish for all those who became newly appointed to civil service positions, including postal workers, tax officials, agricultural inspectors, etc. Proficiency in just one official language for entrance to the public service was introduced in 1974, in part through the actions of protest organizations like the Language Freedom Movement. Though the first official language requirement was also dropped for wider public service jobs, Irish remains a required subject of study in all schools within the Republic which receive public money, see also Education in the Republic of Ireland. Those wishing to teach in primary schools in the state must also pass a compulsory examination called Scrúdú Céilio na Gaeilge. The need for a pass in Leaving Certificate Irish or English for entry to the Gardaí, police, was introduced in September 2005, although applicants are given lessons in the language during the 2 years of training. The most important official documents of the Irish government must be published in both Irish and English or Irish alone, in accordance with the Official Languages Act 2003, enforced by An Comhairle Inu Tainga, the Irish language ombudsman. The National University of Ireland requires all students wishing to embark on a degree course in the NUI federal system to pass the subject of Irish in the Leaving Certificate or GCE/GCSE examinations. Exemptions are made from this requirement for students born outside of the Republic of Ireland, those who were born in the Republic but completed primary education outside it, and students diagnosed with dyslexia. The National University of Ireland, Galway is required to appoint people who are competent in the Irish language, as long as they meet all other aspects of the vacancy they are appointed to. This requirement is laid down by the University College Galway Act, 1929, Section 3. It is expected that the requirement may be repealed in due course. For a number of years there has been vigorous debate in political, academic and other circles about the failure of most students in the mainstream, English medium, schools to achieve competence in the language, even after 14 years. The concomitant decline in the number of traditional native speakers has also been a cause of great concern. There is, however, a growing body of Irish speakers in the cities. Most of these are products of an independent education system in which Irish is the sole language of instruction. Such schools are known at the primary level as Gaelscoileanna and are supported by a number of secondary colleges. These Irish medium schools send a much higher proportion of students onto tertiary level than do the mainstream schools, and it seems increasingly likely that, within a generation, habitual users of Irish will typically be members of an urban, middle-class and highly educated minority. Parliamentary legislation is supposed to be available in both Irish and English but is frequently only available in English. This is notwithstanding that Article 25.4 of the Constitution of Ireland requires that an official translation of any law in one official language be provided immediately in the other official language, if not already passed in both official languages. In 2007, filmmaker Mansion Megan found few speakers and some incredulity while speaking only Irish in Dublin. He was unable to accomplish some everyday tasks, as portrayed in his documentary Novella.
Contact.
There are parts of Ireland where Irish is still spoken daily to some extent as a traditional native language. These regions are known individually and collectively as the Gaeltacht, or in the plural as Gaeltachtaí. While the Gaeltacht's fluent Irish speakers, whose numbers have been estimated at 20 or 30,000, are a minority of the total number of fluent Irish speakers. They represent a higher concentration of Irish speakers than other parts of the country, and it is only in Gaeltacht areas that Irish continues to be a natural community vernacular for part of the general population. According to data compiled by the Irish Department of Community, Rural and Gaeltacht Affairs, only 1/4 of households in officially Gaeltacht areas are fluent in Irish. The author of a detailed analysis of the survey, Doncha O'H of the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology, described the Irish language policy followed by Irish governments as a complete and absolute disaster. The Irish Times, referring to his analysis published in the Irish language newspaper Foints, quoted him as follows: "It is an absolute indictment of successive Irish governments that at the foundation of the Irish state there were 250,000 fluent Irish speakers living in Irish-speaking or semi-Irish-speaking areas, but the number now is between 20,000 and 30,000. In the 1920s, when the Irish Free State was founded, Irish was still a vernacular in the following areas: South Connemara, from a point west of Spiddal, covering Inbrin, Carrow, Rasmuck, and the islands. The Aran Islands. Northwest Donegal and the area around Gweedore, including Ranafast, Ran na Foost, birthplace of notable writers and musicians. Gortahawk, the surrounding townlands and Tory Island. The townland of Rathcairn, County Meath. To some extent this remains the case. The strongest Gaeltacht areas, numerically and socially, are those of South Connemara, the west of the Dingle Peninsula and northwest Donegal, in which some residents still use Irish as their primary language. These areas were referred to until recently as the Forailtacht, True Gaeltacht. There are Gaeltacht regions in County Galway, Seachtain Na Gaeilge, including Connemara, Connemara, the Aran Islands, Oilenaran, Carrow, and Cheathrua, and Spiddal, and Spiddale, on the west coast of County Donegal, County Na Gaeilge. In the part which is known as Tyrconnell, Tyronnale, Dingle Peninsula, Corked Webn, and Ivora Peninsula, Wibrach, in County Kerry, County Chiari. Smaller ones also exist in counties Mayo, County Mayo, Meath, County Nami, Waterford, County Fortledge, and Cork, County Chalkeye. Gweedore, Gorthdop County Donegal is the largest Gaeltacht parish in Ireland. Irish summer colleges are attended by tens of thousands of Irish teenagers annually. Students live with Gaeltacht families, attend classes, participate in sports, go to Seachtain and are obliged to speak Irish. All aspects of Irish culture and tradition are encouraged.
Northern Ireland.
Before the establishment of the Northern Ireland state in 1921, Irish was recognised as a school subject and as Celtic in some third-level institutions. Between 1921 and 1972, Northern Ireland had devolved government. During those years the political party holding power in the Stormont Parliament, the Ulster Unionist Party, UUP, was hostile to the language. The context of this hostility was the political use of the language by nationalists to assert the belief of an independent Ireland. In broadcasting, there was an exclusion on the reporting of minority cultural issues, and Irish was excluded from radio and television for almost the first 50 years of the previous devolved government. The language received a degree of formal recognition in Northern Ireland from the United Kingdom, under the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, and then, in 2003, by the government's ratification in respect of the language of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. The British government promised to create legislation encouraging the language as part of the 2006 St Andrews Agreement.
European Union.
Irish became an official language of the EU on January 1, 2007, meaning that MEPs with Irish fluency can now speak the language in the EU Parliament in Europe and at committees, although in the case of the latter they have to give prior notice to a simultaneous interpreter in order to ensure that what they say can be interpreted into other languages. While an official language of the European Union, only co-decision regulations must be available in Irish for the moment, due to a renewable 5-year derogation on what has to be translated, requested by the Irish government when negotiating the language's new official status. Any expansion in the range of documents to be translated will depend on the results of the first 5-year review and on whether the Irish authorities decide to seek an extension. The Irish government has committed itself to train the necessary number of translators and interpreters and to bear the related costs. Before Irish became an official language, it was afforded the status of treaty language, and only the highest level documents of the EU had been made available in Irish.
Outside Ireland.
The Irish language was carried abroad in the modern period by a vast diaspora, chiefly to Britain in North America, but also to Australia, New Zealand and Argentina. The first large movements began in the 17th century, largely as a result of the Cromwellian conquest, which saw many Irish sent to the West Indies. Irish emigration to America was well established by the 18th century, and was reinforced in the 1840s by thousands fleeing from the famine. This flight also affected Britain. Up until that time, most emigrants spoke Irish as their first language, though English was steadily establishing itself as the primary language. Irish speakers had first arrived in Australia in the late 18th century as convicts and soldiers, and many Irish-speaking settlers followed, particularly in the 1860s. New Zealand also received some of this influx. Argentina was the only non-English-speaking country to receive large numbers of Irish emigrants, and there were few Irish speakers among them. Relatively few of the emigrants were literate in Irish, but manuscripts in the language were brought to both Australia and America, and it was in America that the first newspaper to make significant use of Irish was established. In Australia, too, the language found its way into print. The Gaelic revival, which started in Ireland in the 1890s, found a response abroad, with branches of the Gaelic League being established in all the countries to which Irish speakers had emigrated. The decline of Irish in Ireland and a slowing of emigration helped to ensure a decline in the language abroad, along with natural attrition in the host countries. Despite this, a handful of enthusiasts continued to learn and cultivate Irish in diaspora countries and elsewhere, a trend which strengthened in the second half of the 20th century. Today the language is taught at tertiary level in North America, Australia and Europe, and Irish speakers outside Ireland contribute to journalism and literature in the language. The Irish language is also one of the official languages of the Celtic League, political organisation, which is a non-governmental organisation that promotes self-determination and Celtic identity and culture in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Brittany, Cornwall and the Isle of Man, known as the Celtic Nations. It places particular emphasis on the indigenous Celtic languages. It is recognised by the United Nations as a non-governmental organisation with roster status, and is part of the UN's Economic and Social Council. The organisation has branches in all the Celtic nations and in Patagonia, Argentina and New York City, USA and London, UK.
Use.
The following statistics were published in 2012. To place those figures in context, the same report provided statistics for other household languages in Ireland, excluding English except in areas collectively known as the Gaeilge Act. Efforts have been made by the state, individuals and organisations to preserve, promote and revive the language, but with mixed results. Around the turn of the 21st century, estimates of native speakers ranged from 20,000 to 80,000 people. In the 2006 census for the Republic, 85,000 people reported using Irish as a daily language outside of the education system, and 1.2 million reported using it at least occasionally in or out of school. In the 2011 census, these numbers had increased to 94,000 and 1.3 million, respectively. There are several thousand Irish speakers in Northern Ireland. It has been estimated that the active Irish language scene probably comprises 5 to 10% of Ireland's population. In recent decades there has been a significant increase in the number of urban Irish speakers, particularly in Dublin. This community, described as disparate but large, well-educated and mostly middle-class, enjoys a lively cultural life, and has been linked to the growth of non-mainstream schools which teach through the medium of Irish. There are also many Irish speakers abroad, particularly in the United States and Canada. Irish was spoken until the early 20th century on the island of Newfoundland, in a form known as Newfoundland Irish.
Names.
In An Gaeilge Díonú Ofigiúil, the official written standard, the name of the language is Gaeilge, Irish.
Irish language.
Irish is a Gaeilge language of the Indo-European languages family, originating in Ireland and historically spoken by the Irish people. Irish is spoken as a first language by a small minority of Irish people, and as a second language by a rather larger group. Irish enjoys constitutional status as the national and first official language of the Republic of Ireland. It is an official language of the European Union and an officially recognised minority language in Northern Ireland. Irish was the predominant language of the Irish people for most of their recorded history, and they brought it with them to other countries, notably Scotland and the Isle of Man, where it gave rise to Scottish Gaelic and Manx. It has the oldest vernacular literature in Western Europe. The fate of the language was influenced by the increasing power of the English state in Ireland. Elizabethan officials viewed the use of Irish unfavourably, as being a threat to all things English in Ireland. Its decline began under English rule in the 17th century. In the latter part of the 19th century there was a dramatic decrease in the number of speakers, beginning after the Great Famine of 1845 to 1852, when Ireland lost 20 to 25% of its population either to emigration or death. Irish-speaking areas were hit especially hard. By the end of British rule, the language was spoken by less than 15% of the national population. Since then, Irish speakers have been in the minority at the 5th century. Old Irish, dating from the 6th century, used the Latin alphabet and is attested primarily in marginalia to Latin manuscripts. During this time, the Irish language absorbed many Latin words, including ecclesiastical terms. Examples are east-bag, bishop, from episcopus, and dominic, Sunday, from dominica. By the 10th century, Old Irish had evolved into Middle Irish, which was spoken throughout Ireland and in Scotland and the Isle of Man. It is the language of a large corpus of literature, including the Ulster cycle. From the 12th century Middle Irish began to evolve into Modern Irish in Ireland, into Scottish Gaelic in Scotland, and into the Manx language in the Isle of Man. Early Modern Irish, dating from the 13th century, was the basis of the literary language of both Ireland and Gaelic-speaking Scotland. Modern Irish, as attested in the work of such writers as Geoffrey Keating, may be said to date from the 17th century, and was the medium of popular literature from that time on. From the 18th century on, the language lost ground in the east of the country, partly because the British government discouraged its use in education, law and administration, partly because of the spread of bilingualism, a conspicuous example of the process known by linguists as language shift. It was a change characterized by diglossia, two languages being used by the same community in different social and economic situations, and transitional bilingualism, monoglot Irish-speaking grandparents with bilingual ch pronunciation. Before the spelling reform of 1948, this form was spelled Gaeilge. Originally this was the genitive of Gaeilge, the form used in Classical Modern Irish. Older spellings of this include Gaeilge in Classical Irish and Gaeilge in Old Irish. The modern spelling results from the deletion of the silent dh in the middle of Gaeilge, whereas the name Gaeilge language, used to refer to the language family including Irish, comes from Old Irish. Other forms of the name found in the various modern Irish dialects, in addition to South Connacht Gaeilge above, include Gaeilge Gaeilge or Gaeilge in Ulster Irish and Northern Connacht Irish and Gaeilge Jaelu and Gaelane in Munster Irish. In Europe the language is usually referred to as Irish, with Gaelic or Irish Gaelic often used elsewhere. The term Irish Gaelic is often used when English speakers discuss the relationship between the three Gaeilge languages, Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx. Sometimes Irish is taken to mean Hiberno-English, a form of English associated with Ireland. Scottish Gaelic is usually referred to simply as Gaelic, though pronounced differently. Listen, help info.
History.
Written Irish is first attested in inscriptions from the 4th century AD. This stage of the language is known as Primitive Irish. These writings have been found throughout Ireland and the west coast of Great Britain. Primitive Irish transitioned into Old Irish through children and monoglot English-speaking grandchildren. By the mid-18th century, English had moved from being the language of government to being the language of the Catholic middle class, the Catholic Church and public intellectuals. English had a particular economic value for emigrants, especially females. Increasingly, as the value of English became apparent, the prohibition on Irish in schools had the sanction of parents. The Great Famine, 1845–1849, is seen as precipitating the final catastrophic decline. The same public intellectuals who had acquiesced in the change to English now furnished some of the first individuals to challenge it. At the end of the 19th century they instituted the Gaelic revival in an attempt to encourage the learning and use of Irish, though few adult learners mastered the language. The vehicle of the revival was the Gaelic League, and particular emphasis was placed on the folk tradition, which in Irish is particularly rich. Efforts were also made to develop journalism and a modern literature.
Phonology.
In pronunciation, Irish most closely resembles its nearest relatives, Scottish Gaelic and Manx. One notable feature is that consonants, except /h/ come in pairs, one broad, velarized, pronounced with the back of the tongue pulled back towards the soft palate, and one slender, palatalized, pronounced with the middle of the tongue pushed up towards the hard palate. While broad slender pairs are not unique to Irish, being found, for example,